Practical Mental Influence. Poor William Walker Atkinson. Chapter 1. The Universal Principle of Energetic Motion. Students of history discern an unbroken lineage of illusions regarding the enigmatic influence one human mind exercises over another. Within the earliest archives, traditions, and legends, one discovers references to the prevailing conviction that an individual could wield a strange, preternatural power over the psyches of others, thereby influencing them toward benevolence or malevolence. Furthermore, the scholar will encounter a concomitant belief that specific individuals possess a mental potency capable of bending even inanimate objects and circumstances to its will. Deep within the obscure antiquity of human history upon this planet, this conviction existed, and it has steadfastly persisted notwithstanding the strenuous opposition of material science, even unto the present era. The passage of years has not eroded this tenet, and in these nascent days of the 20th century, it has acquired a renewed vigor and vitality. For its adherents have boldly advanced to the forefront, and, confronting skeptical materialistic thinkers, have claimed the designation of science for this truth, insisting that it be removed, definitively, from the categories of superstition, credulity, and ignorant phantasm. Were it not pitiable, it would be amusing to survey the presumptuous, complacent, smug, and self-satisfied stance of the materialistic school of thought, which would dismiss as a foolish delusion that which many of the wisest sages of past ages have accepted and promulgated as truth. These modern pretenders to omniscience would sneer contemptuously at facts known to occur actually in the daily lives of thousands of intelligent persons, and which the experience of humankind has demonstrated for many centuries, across all lands and among all races. The difficulty resides in the dogmatic assumption of the materialistic school that what is recognized as mind is merely some peculiar function of the material brain. Some writers even maintain that the brain secretes thought, just as the liver secretes bile. They refuse to perceive that the operation of mind is a manifestation of energy akin to electricity, magnetism, light, heat, gravitation, cohesion, and so forth. Because mental energy does not register the vibrations associated with these lower forms of energy, they conclude that the higher mental energy does not exist. Having formulated a theory to accommodate their materialistic conceptions, they attempt to disregard all facts inconsistent with said theory. If they encounter a fact that will not fit within their narrow theory, so much the worse for the fact, as a writer has noted, and they promptly ignore or dispute it. In truth, the investigator is not compelled to resort to metaphysical explanations to account for the phenomena of mental influence. The very facts of physical science itself, if rightly interpreted, will provide the clue to the mystery and will direct the steps of the honest investigator toward the path where he may discover the solution to this perplexing riddle. Although we recognize that the true solution resides in the metaphysical realm, physical science will nevertheless corroborate the facts of its metaphysical sister science. Instead of contradicting the latter, it will actually contribute significantly towards supplying analogous facts and principles as a basis for a theory of metaphysical realities. The student will immediately perceive that, insofar as physical science is concerned, one must commence with the phenomenon of thought transference. For in that phase of the subject, an elementary principle may be found that is evident in many other forms of phenomena. We have provided many instances of thought transference in the 2 preceding volumes of this series, entitled Mind Reading and Psychomancy, respectively, and thus we need not repeat the same herein. The salient fact is that thought transference does exist and may be accounted for upon purely scientific grounds, without invoking the truths of metaphysical thought. We acknowledge that this is a strong statement and a positive assertion, yet we also know that the same may be demonstrated. Let us consider this phase of the subject. Primarily, physical science teaches that underlying all forms, degrees, and apparent differences in matter and energy, there is to be found a manifestation of some elementary energy, which manifests in what is known as vibrations. Everything in the material world is in vibration, perpetually manifesting a high degree of motion. Without vibration, there would be no such entity as a material universe. From the electronic corpuscles which science teaches compose the atom, ascending through the atom and molecule, until the most complex forms of matter are manifested, there is the ever-present vibration. Furthermore, throughout all forms of energy, light, heat, electricity, magnetism, and the like, vibration is likewise ever-present. Indeed, physical science itself teaches not only that vibration is the basic force underlying other forces and the various forms of matter, but also that the apparent differences between the various forms of matter, and likewise between the various forms of energy, are caused simply and solely by the varying degrees of vibration manifested. Just as the difference between the lowest tone distinguishable by the human ear and the highest note perceptible by the same sensory organ is merely a difference in the rate of vibration, just as is the difference between the dull red color at one end of the spectrum and the violet at the other, with the intervening colors known as indigo, blue, green, yellow, and orange, along with all the combinations of shades arising therefrom, and just as the difference between the greatest degree of cold known to science and the greatest degree of heat conceivable is due solely and wholly to varying rates of vibration, so too is the difference between all forms of matter or force simply a matter of the rate of vibration. In summary, all material and physical things are simply manifestations of some infinite and eternal energy from which all things proceed, their differences resulting merely from the varying degrees of vibration manifested therein. One must recall that this is not vague philosophy, ethereal metaphysics, or spiritualistic vagaries, to quote from the materialistic writers, but facts claimed and admitted by the greatest physical scientists of the age, as a reference to their lectures and textbooks will demonstrate to anyone. Moreover, any intelligent physical scientist will inform you that science has every reason to believe there exist vast fields of energy and force, the vibrations of which are far too high for even the delicate instruments of science to record, but which nevertheless exist and manifest effects. It was only recently that science was able to capture X-rays and other forms of high radioactivity, and yet these rays and forces had always existed. And in the future, science will perfect instruments capable of registering still higher forms of energy. In due course, some scientist will perfect an instrument capable of registering and recording the subtle vibrations of thought, and perhaps in time, someone will perfect that instrument so that it will not only record such thought vibrations and waves, but, like the phonograph, it will be able to reproduce and transmit similar vibrations so that others may feel the thoughts, just as they now hear the sounds from the phonograph. Such a prediction is no more miraculous than would have been the prediction of the telephone, the phonograph, the wireless telegraph, and sundry other discoveries and inventions a century ago. Has one ever considered that there are colors the eye cannot perceive, but which delicate instruments clearly register? In fact, the rays of light which cause sunburn, and which register on the photographic plate, are not visible to the eye. The eye perceives the lower rays, but only instruments adapted for the purpose detect the higher ones. The ocular faculty cannot perceive the X-ray as it traverses the chamber. However, the photographic plate will register its presence, and its illumination may generate a photographic impression. The luminous rays visible to the eyes constitute only the lower frequencies. The higher spectra lie far beyond the eye's capacity to record, and exceeding even the scope of the most sensitive apparatus. There exist rays and waves of light of such elevated vibratory velocity as to defy even instrumental detection. Are you cognizant that there exist acoustic frequencies inaudible to human ears which the microphone will intercept and amplify? Scientific imagination envisions instruments capable of capturing the songs of the mite, akin to insects, and magnifying them until they become distinguishable. There exist electrical currents that may traverse your somatic form, unperceived by your senses, yet possessing sufficient potency to illuminate electric lamps. Consider the observations of certain eminent scientists. Professor Elisha Gary, a celebrated man of science and pedagogue, has stated, "There is abundant material for speculation in the concept that there exist sound waves which no human ear can hear, and chromatic light waves which no eye can see. The vast, obscure, and silent interval between 40,000 and 400 trillion vibrations per second, and the infinite expanse exceeding 700 trillion vibrations per second, where light ceases in the universe of motion, renders it plausible to engage in conjecture." Professor Williams, the renowned scientific author, has remarked, "There is no gradation between the most rapid undulations or oscillations that produce our sensations of sound, and the slowest of those which give rise to our sensations of the gentlest warmth. An immense chasm exists between them, sufficiently ample to encompass another realm of motion, all situated between our sphere of sound and our sphere of heat and light. Furthermore, there is no valid justification for assuming that matter is incapable of such interstitial activity, or that such activity may not engender intermediate sensations, provided that there exist organs for intercepting and sensitizing their movements. Thus, one observes that within the scientific theory of vibrations, there may be discovered ample scope for a scientific explication of all claims made by adherents of the truth of mental influence, without departing the region of physical science, and without encroaching upon the plane of metaphysics. Numerous additional corroborations exist from this identical source, to which we may allude as we advance. There exists but one truth, and it manifests upon all planes: the spiritual, the mental, and the physical, and these manifestations concur and coincide. Consequently, no mentalist need fear the test of physical science, for each plane will substantiate the facts and phenomena of those below or above it. The three constitute merely varying phases of the one. In this concise treatise, we shall adhere closely to the plane of physical science, for in so doing, we shall be enabled to elucidate the subject with greater clarity to many than if we had attempted to articulate the doctrine in metaphysical terminology. Ultimately, no contradiction exists. Each fragment of truth must interlock seamlessly with every other, for all are integral components of the whole. Chapter 2. Cerebral Radiations and the Generation of Mental Atmospheres. In the preceding chapter, we observed that vibration constitutes the foundational stratum underlying all manifestations of energy and all forms of matter. We further cited two eminent scientists whose assertions indicated the existence of vibratory fields unoccupied by any currently categorized forms of energy. The deduction being that, inasmuch as nature permits no vacuums in her processes, these unexplored domains must be inhabited by specific energetic forms as yet unrecognized by physical science. The doctrines of occultists across all epochs and geographies, alongside the tenets of modern mental science, posit that the mind, during its cerebral manifestation of thought, generates a species of energy characterized by intensely high vibration. This energy is capable of being, and indeed is, projected in vibratory waves from the cerebrum to the minds of others situated within its sphere of influence. All scholars of mental influence have observed the striking similitude manifested between the phenomena of electrical and magnetic energy on the one hand, and the phenomena of mental energy on the other. This analogy is so precise that one may adopt the established scientific facts regarding electrical and magnetic occurrences and proceed with the assurance of discovering a remarkably exact correspondence within the realm of mental phenomena. Furthermore, the acknowledgement of this reality assists practitioners in the mental field in classifying the multifarious phenomena that come to their attention, thereby facilitating the elaboration of both the theory and practice of mental influence. Primarily, it is now a fact well established and accepted by investigators that the generation of thought and the manifestation of mental states necessitate the combustion of cerebral matter, resulting in the consequent production of a high-frequency vibratory energy. Physiologists acknowledge this reality, and standard academic texts make reference to it. Experimental data has demonstrated that cerebral temperature rises in direct correlation with the intensity of feeling and thought, and that there is undeniably a generation of energy and a consumption of brain tissue bearing a very close resemblance to the process of generating electrical energy. With this premise conceded, it logically follows that this energy, once liberated, must be emanated or dispatched from the brain in a manner akin to the radiation of other known energetic forms, specifically as waves of vibratory force. Light and heat traverse space in this fashion, as do electricity and magnetism, and likewise the forces of radioactivity. Moreover, investigators of mental influence have demonstrated through experimentation the existence of thought induction, alongside numerous other phases of manifestation similar to those exhibited by electricity and magnetism. Flammarion, the renowned and eminent French scientist, has commented upon this subject. We therefore summarize our preceding observations with the conclusion that one mind is capable of acting upon another from a distance, without the habitual medium of words or any other visible means of communication. It appears to us altogether unreasonable to repudiate this conclusion if we are to accept the established facts. This deduction shall be abundantly demonstrated. There is nothing unscientific nor anything romantic in the admission that an idea may influence a brain from a distance. The action of one human being upon another from a distance is a scientific fact. It is as certain as the existence of Paris, of Napoleon, of oxygen, or of Sirius. The same authority also states, "There can be no doubt that our physical force creates a movement in the ether which transmits itself afar. Like all movements in the ether, it becomes perceptible to brains in harmony with our own. The transformation of a psychic action into an ethereal movement, and the reverse, may be analogous to the process occurring within a telephone, wherein the receptive plate, which is identical to the plate at the opposing terminus, reconstructs the transmitted sonorous movement, not by means of sound, but by electricity. However, these are merely comparisons. When a thought or feeling is generated within the mind or brain of an individual, the resultant energy flows forth from that person's cerebrum in the form of waves of mental energy, radiating from the immediate vicinity of the thinker to a distance proportionate to the intensity of the thought or feeling. These thought waves possess the property of awakening similar vibrations in the minds of other persons who enter their field of force, in accordance with the laws of mental influence, which laws shall be elucidated in the subsequent chapter. As we proceed with our consideration of the subject of mental influence in the succeeding chapters, we shall witness the many and varied forms of the manifestation of thought waves. At this juncture, we shall merely survey the phenomena in a general manner. Thought waves manifest in a diversity of forms and phases. Some are the waves emanated from the minds of all thinkers, unconsciously and without purpose, and usually lacking significant force. Others are sent forth with great vigor and travel vast distances, manifesting a degree of influence commensurate with the force with which they are projected. Others are directed purposely toward specific individuals or locations, traveling rapidly in a direct line to the point at which they have been aimed. Still others are sent forth with substantial strength and power, but rather than being directed toward any particular person or place, they are designed to sweep about in great whirlpools of energy, affecting all who happen to fall within their field of force. One will readily comprehend that there exists a significant distinction between thought waves sent forth idly and unconsciously, without knowledge of the underlying laws of mental influence, and those projected with a full understanding of the laws governing the phenomena, urged on and directed by the powerful will of the sender. The force is identical, yet the degree of its power and the measure of its effects are determined by the conditions of its propulsion. The vibratory force of these thought waves does not cease upon the emission of the wave but persists for a considerable duration thereafter. Just as heat in a chamber persists long after the fire in the stove has been extinguished, just as the perfume of a flower remains in a room long after the blossom has been removed, just as a ray of light traverses space for millions of miles and for centuries after the star itself has been obliterated from existence, just as any and all forms of vibratory energy persist in manifestation after the initial impulse has been withdrawn, so too do the vibrations of thought continue long after the thought, nay, long after the brain which sent them forth has returned to dust. There are many locations today saturated with the thought vibrations of minds long since passed from the physical body. There are numerous places imbued with the potent vibrations of tragedies long since enacted therein. Every locale possesses an atmosphere of its own, arising from the thought vibrations set in motion by the various persons who have inhabited or occupied it. Every city possesses its own mental atmosphere, which exerts an effect upon persons relocating thereto. Some are lively, some dull, some progressive, some antiquated, some moral and some immoral. All are the result of the character of the early settlers and the leading spirits of those places. This atmosphere affects individuals moving into these towns, who either sink to the general level or, if sufficiently robust, assist in altering the mental tone of the locality. Occasionally, a shift in conditions precipitates a large influx of new inhabitants to the town, and the mental waves of these newcomers tend to bring about a marked transformation in the local mental atmosphere. These facts have been noted by many observant individuals who were, perhaps, unfamiliar with the laws and principles underlying the phenomena. Many have, of course, discerned the differing atmospheres of stores, offices, and other establishments of commerce. Certain such venues inspire an aura of confidence and reliance, whereas others engender sentiments of suspicion and distrust. Some convey an impression of vigorous, vigilant administration, while others strike the observer as antiquated and suffering from the absence of dynamic oversight. Have you ever paused to consider that these distinct atmospheres are generated by the prevailing mental dispositions of those responsible for the command of such establishments? The proprietors of commercial entities emanate their own thought waves. Consequently, their subordinates, naturally adopting the cadence established for them, transmit similar vibrations, until presently the entire establishment resonates upon a specific frequency. Permit an alteration in administration to transpire, and observe the transformation that rapidly becomes apparent. Have you ever perceived the mental atmospheres characterizing the residences you have chanced to visit? One may discern and identify every fluctuating note within the mental spectrum of their occupants. From certain thresholds, harmony manifests explicitly, whereas others exude discord the instant one steps across the entrance. Some emanate a psychic warmth, whilst others appear as frigid as a glacial mass. Reflect for a moment and recollect the sundry domiciles or venues you frequent, observing how the mental vibrations of the inhabitants reveal themselves to the caller. The destitute quarters of our metropolises, the dens of iniquity and haunts of dissipation, resonate with the character of thought and sentiment possessed by those dwelling within them. Consequently, the visitor of feeble volition is thereby tempted. Conversely, by the same token, particular locales are replete with potent, beneficial, and edifying vibrations, which serve to uplift and exalt those who enter their sphere of influence. Thoughts and sentiments are contagious by virtue of the law of vibration and mental induction. Once this principle is comprehended, the individual is empowered to safeguard and ameliorate his own condition. Such knowledge bestows strength. Chapter 3. The transmission and attraction of vibratory mental states. As we elucidated in the antecedent chapter, the phenomena of mental influence exhibit a striking analogy to those of electrical or magnetic energy. This correspondence obtains not solely regarding the phase of wave motion and transmission, but equally within the phase of induction, as we shall presently observe. In the physical sciences, the designation induction is employed to signify that specific quality within a manifestation of energy which tends to reproduce, in a secondary object, the vibrations evident in a primary object, independent of direct contact between the two bodies. A magnet will induce magnetism within an object situated at a distance from its immediate vicinity. Similarly, an electrified object tends to engender analogous vibrations in a separate object through induction, even across vast expanses. Thermal waves traverse the ether, tending to generate heat vibrations in objects remotely situated, most notably exemplified by the relationship between the Sun and the Earth. Even acoustic waves affect other entities in this manner, as demonstrated in the celebrated instance of a glass or vase resonating in response to a musical note intoned from afar. Indeed, our very faculties of sight and hearing operate via processes analogous to those described. In this precise manner, thought waves convey the vibrations of the projecting mind across distances great or small, tending to establish similar vibrations within the minds of other individuals falling within their field of force. Thus, an individual experiencing a potent degree of anger will emit waves of a corresponding mental vibration. These, upon contacting the brains of others, tend to instigate similar sentiments or emotions, thereby causing the recipient to feel irritable, peevish, or even to manifest an identical state of ire. We are all cognizant of the facility with which a conflict is incited by a highly enraged individual within a chamber radiating violent vibrations. One need only recall instances of mob violence to perceive how readily the contagion of hatred and anger propagates among those who permit themselves to be influenced. Furthermore, this principle holds true not merely for undesirable emotions and sensibilities, but equally for those deemed desirable. The influence of a virtuous man, possessing mental fortitude, permeates those surrounding him, influencing them toward the good. Orators, thespians, preachers, and pedagogues project potent currents of will, which tend to engender mental conditions within their auditors corresponding to the sentiments held by the mind of the speaker. When one recollects how a specific orator swayed one's emotions, or how a particular actor compelled one to weep with pity, shudder with fear, or laugh with joy, one perceives the mechanism by which mental induction operates. However, this veracity obtains not only when we stand in the immediate presence of the individual transmitting thought waves. It is equally true that we are influenced by persons vastly removed from us in space. This often occurs without their knowledge or intent, although occasionally, in the case of one who comprehends the principle, it is executed with full cognizance and volition. The ether that permeates space conveys these thought waves in all directions, and the surface of the Earth, particularly in densely populated regions, is replete with these undulations. These waves, bearing mental vibrations and coming into contact with one another, tend either to establish combinations or, conversely, to neutralize one another. That is to say, should two sets of waves of a similar nature intersect, a combination is likely to be formed between them, much like two chemicals possessing an affinity for one another. In this manner, the mental atmosphere of locations, towns, residences, and the like is constituted. Conversely, if currents of opposing vibrations come into contact, a conflict shall be manifested between the two, wherein each shall diminish in proportion to its weakness. The result shall be either a mutual neutralization or a combination possessing vibrations of an average rate. For instance, if two currents of mental energy converge, one being a thought of love and the other of hate, they will neutralize one another if they are of equal magnitude. Or, if one is more potent than the other, it shall persist, albeit deprived of much of its vitality. Were it not for this neutralizing effect, we would be largely at the mercy of aberrant currents of thought. Nature affords us protection in this manner, as well as by rendering us immune to a considerable degree. Nevertheless, we remain affected by these waves to a significant extent, unless we have learned to repel them through knowledge of the laws and the enforcement thereof by practice. We are all aware of how immense waves of sentiment sweep across a town, city, or nation, causing the populace to lose their equilibrium. Great surges of political enthusiasm, martial spirit, or prejudice for or against specific individuals or groups sweep over locations, compelling men to act in a manner they will subsequently regret upon regaining their composure and considering their actions in cold blood. Demagogues or magnetic leaders seeking to secure votes or patronage will sway them, and they shall be led into acts of mob violence or similar atrocities by yielding to these waves of contagious thought. Conversely, we all recognize how great waves of religious sentiment sweep over a community upon the occasion of some profound revival, excitement, or fervor. The effect of these thought waves, insofar as the power of induction is concerned, naturally depends quite materially upon the potency of the thought or emotion being manifested in the mind projecting them. The majority of persons invest but little force into their mental manifestations. However, here and there one may encounter a thinker whose thought waves constitute practically a stream of living will, which naturally exerts a very potent inductive effect upon the minds of others with whom the waves come into contact. Yet, it likewise follows that a number of persons thinking along identical lines will produce a substantial volume of power through the combination of their thought currents into great streams of mental force. Then again, there exists another feature of the case which we must not overlook: the attraction between minds, by virtue of which one draws to oneself the thought waves of others whose thoughts are in accord with one's own. The converse is equally true, for there exists a repulsion between the minds of persons and the thought waves of others antagonistic to their thoughts. To cite a well-worn and frequently employed expression to illustrate this truth: like attracts like, and birds of a feather flock together. There is ever in operation this marvelous law of attraction and repulsion of mental energy. Persons allowing their thoughts to proceed along certain lines, and permitting their feelings to be expressed in specific ways, draw to themselves the thought waves and mental influences of others keyed to the same mental keynote. Likewise, they repel the waves and influences of an opposing nature. This is a paramount fact to retain in one's daily existence. Good attracts good and repels evil. Evil attracts evil and repels good. The predominant mental attitude serves to attract similar influences and to repel opposing ones. Therefore, observe carefully the character and nature of your thoughts. Cultivate the desirable ones and repress the undesirable. Verily, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Some thought waves, sent forth with but minimal strength, travel slowly and do not proceed very far from their point of emanation. Rather, they creep along like smoke or fog, lazily and yielding. Other thoughts, charged with a greater intensity of desire or will, dart forth vigorously like an electric spark and often traverse great distances. The weak thought waves do not endure for a prolonged period, but fade away, or become neutralized or dissipated by stronger forces. However, strong thoughts persist for a considerable duration, retaining much of their vitality and energy. In a corresponding manner, the thought waves of an individual continue to resonate within his immediate vicinity wheresoever he may traverse, and those entering into contact with him are inevitably impressed by the character of his vibrations in this regard. Certain men emit lugubrious vibrations, which one perceives palpably upon engagement with them. Conversely, others emanate optimism, fortitude, and felicity, conditions which are subsequently induced in those with whom they associate. Indeed, many individuals manifest these attributes with such intensity that one may discern the effect the very instant such persons cross the threshold of a room. They transport their distinct atmosphere with them, and this identical state is engendered within the minds of those surrounding them. By the same token, some individuals carry with them vibrations of willpower and masterfulness that impinge upon the minds of others, compelling them to perceive the potency of such persons, thereby subjugating their own volition and altering their desires. Others exhibit a potent force of fascination or attraction, in a similar vein, which serves to draw others toward them and toward their aspirations and wishes. This principle functions not only within the phase of general mental atmospheres but also within the phase of direct personal influence. All forms of mental influence operate along the vectors of mental induction, as herein described. The principle remains invariant in all cases and instances, although the modus operandi varies according to the particular phase of the phenomena manifested. Bear this in mind as we proceed, and you will be enabled to comprehend the subject with significantly greater clarity. Chapter 4. Mastering Voluntary Attention and One-Pointed Focus. The two paramount elements involved in the manifestation of mental influence, in all its various modalities, are designated as concentration and mental imagining. The former of these constituents shall be examined within the present chapter, while the subsequent chapter shall address the consideration of the latter. Etymologically, the term concentration originates from two Latin roots, con, a prefix signifying to, and centrum, denoting a center or fixed central point. When conjoined, these terms literally signify the act of bringing matters to a common point or focus. Consequently, the term concentration is understood to denote, literally, the act or state of converging upon a fixed point or focus. Employing an analogous paradigm from physical science, one readily discerns that the highest forms of energy, force, or power are exhibited by converging the force to a focus, center, or common point, thereby directing the entirety of the employed energy to that specific locus, rather than permitting it to dissipate over a more extensive area. Electricity generated by a battery or dynamo, should it be permitted to diffuse itself across a vast surface, manifests merely a negligible degree of the power that might be derived by constraining it to discharge from a minute focal point. A similar principle governs the potency of steam, which exhibits tremendous power when compelled to discharge through a restricted aperture, rather than being allowed to expand indiscriminately into the atmosphere. This identical law pertains to gunpowder, which manifests force precisely because its gases are compelled to escape through the narrow confines of a gun barrel, rather than dispersing in all directions as they would if left unconfined. Another pertinent illustration is found in the sunglass or burning glass, which converges the solar rays to a common point or focus, thereby vastly intensifying the heat and light by virtue of this convergence. The occult masters have consistently impressed upon their neophytes the vital importance and necessity of acquiring the faculty of mental concentration. Indeed, all disciplined and developed occultists have diligently persevered toward this end, the result being that certain among them have attained mental powers and influence bordering on the miraculous. All occult phenomena are engendered in this manner, and all occult potency is contingent upon it. Consequently, the student of mental influence must dedicate considerable contemplation, time, and practice to this most critical branch of the subject. It is a fact recognized by all students of mental phenomena that exceedingly few individuals possess more than a negligible degree of concentration. They permit their mental forces to become fragmented and dissipated in all directions, thereby deriving little to no efficacy from the same. To the extent that a man is capable of concentration, so too is he capable of manifesting mental power. A man's capacity for mental concentration constitutes, to a significant degree, the measure of his greatness. Mental concentration, in practice, comprises the act of focusing the mind upon a given subject or object resolutely and steadfastly, and subsequently maintaining that focus for a determinate duration, remaining fully intent upon the objective and precluding any diversion or distraction from said object. It likewise entails the correlative power of subsequently disengaging the mind from that subject or object, and either permitting it repose or focusing it upon an alternate objective. In other words, it either accords undivided attention or inhibits, that is to say, suspends attention regarding the given subject or object. To the reader who lacks experience in the realm of mental concentration, it may appear a facile task to focus the mind upon a subject and retain it there with firmness and fixity. However, a modicum of practice will disabuse such a person of this notion and impart a profound realization of the difficulty inherent in the task. The mind is a remarkably volatile entity. Its tendency is to flit from one matter to another, darting hither and thither, rapidly tiring of sustained attention, and akin to a petulant child, constantly seeking a novel object upon which to exercise itself. Conversely, many individuals permit their minds to concentrate involuntarily upon whatever may capture their fancy. Oblivious to all else, they surrender themselves to the object attracting their momentary attention, often neglecting duties and significant interests, thereby becoming daydreamers rather than disciplined thinkers. This involuntary concentration is a habit to be eschewed, for it constitutes the relinquishment of attention from the control of the will. The mental concentration of the occultist is a vastly distinct phenomenon, solely under the dominion of the will, being applied when advantageous and withdrawn or inhibited when deemed appropriate. The trained occultist concentrates upon a subject or object with profound intensity, appearing wholly immersed in the matter before him and oblivious to all else in the world. Yet, once the task is accomplished or the allotted time has expired, he detaches his mind from the object, remaining entirely reinvigorated, vigilant, and alert regarding the subsequent matter before him. There exists a marked distinction between being controlled by involuntary attention, which is a species of self-hypnosis, and the active control of attention, which serves as evidence of mastery. The secret of mental concentration resides in the control of attention. Furthermore, the control of attention resides in the exercise of the will. A celebrated French psychologist has aptly stated, "The authority is subject to the superior authority of the ego. I yield it or I withhold it as I please. I direct it in turn to several points. I concentrate it upon each point as long as my will can sustain the effort." Sully observes, "Attention may be broadly defined as the active self-direction of the mind to any object which presents itself at the moment." All occult authorities initiate the instruction of their pupils with attention as the preliminary step toward mental concentration. They instruct the pupil to examine a familiar object and to strive to discern as many details as possible within said object. Subsequently, after receiving the pupil's report, the master remands him to the task, enjoining him to seek new details, continuing thus until the pupil has ultimately ascertained virtually everything concerning the object that may be discovered. On the following day, a new object is presented to him, and the process is repeated. Initially, simple objects are assigned, followed by more complex ones, until eventually objects of great complexity are mastered with facility. By this method, not only is the power of close observation acutely honed, but the faculty of attention is also so significantly strengthened that the pupil becomes capable of exerting the maximal degree of mental concentration with scarcely any consciousness of effort. Consequently, such a person becomes a veritable titan in the manifestation of mental influence, for he is able to render his mind one-pointed, as the Orientals describe it, until he has focused and directed a formidable degree of mental influence toward the desired object. Among the practices imposed upon their pupils by occult masters, one may cite mathematics, drawing, analysis, inter alia. You will readily perceive the rationale behind this. Primarily, mathematics requires the undivided attention of the student. Unless he concentrates upon his examples, he will be unable to deduce their solution. Furthermore, in accordance with the principle in nature that practice leads to perfection and that exercise develops power, the discipline of the mind along lines requiring voluntary attention and mental concentration will inevitably result in the acquisition of that mental control and power which renders possible the most potent manifestation of mental influence. The individual who employs mental influence must assuredly possess the capacity to focus the force to a common point in order to manifest the maximum degree of power and influence. This faculty of focusing is derived from the training of the mind in the discipline of concentration. Moreover, concentration stems from the mastery of voluntary attention. Thus, the entire matter is presented herein in summary. Therefore, your initial step toward acquiring mental influence should be the cultivation of voluntary attention. While we might populate page upon page with exercises calculated to fortify your faculty of voluntary attention, one must query the utility of such an abundance. The optimal strategy is to task you with identifying a subject for concentration, for the search itself serves to cultivate attention. Survey your immediate environment for a specific object to subject to detailed scrutiny. Subsequently, fix your attention upon it until you have perceived every observable facet. Thereafter, select an alternative object and prolong the practice. Select a page, this very page should you so choose, and tally the precise number of words contained therein. Following this, ascertain the average number of words required to complete each line. Furthermore, determine the quantity of letters present within each word, within each line, and throughout the entire page. Then, proceed to scrutinize the page to detect if any vocabulary is misspelt, or if any of the typographical characters exhibit imperfections, etc. In brief, familiarize yourself with this document until you possess a comprehensive understanding of its composition. Subsequently, acquire a second page, and after subjecting it to identical analysis, engage in a comparison of the two, and proceed in this manner indefinitely. Naturally, such an undertaking will prove excessively arid and tedious unless you actively cultivate an interest in the process. Furthermore, retaining a mindful awareness of the exercise's ultimate design may serve to stimulate this requisite interest. After engaging in this practice for a brief duration each day, you will commence to discover an enhanced capacity to bestow focused attention upon those objects toward which you endeavor to manifest mental influence. You are thereby developing concentration. This constitutes the paramount secret regarding the utilization of mental influence and elucidates the variance in its manifestation among mankind. Reflect deeply upon this concept. Chapter 5. The Architecture of Internal Visualization and Creative Forms. In the preceding chapter, we directed your attention toward the primary of the two fundamental factors regarding the manifestation of mental influence, specifically mental concentration. In the current chapter, we shall examine the second factor that facilitates the aforementioned manifestation, mental imaging. That which is designated in occultism as a mental image constitutes the mental creation, within the imagination, of a pictorial representation of the objects, events, or conditions that one desires to see manifested or materialized in actual reality. A moment of reflection will demonstrate that unless one comprehends precisely what one desires, one cannot initiate measures toward attaining it upon any plane of manifestation. Furthermore, the more lucidly one's desires are perceived within the imagination, the more distinct becomes the process of advancing toward the realization of said desire. A mental image provides a structural framework upon which to operate. It is akin to the schematic of the architect or the chart of the explorer. Contemplate this concept for a few moments until the idea becomes firmly established within your mind. Consequently, this identical principle applies validly upon the plane wherein the manifestation of mental influence occurs. The occultist initially constructs, within his imagination, a mental image or depiction of the conditions he wishes to induce. He subsequently concentrates his influence potently, rather than in the haphazard manner characteristic of the majority, who fail to comprehend the laws and principles underlying the manifestations of mental forces. The mental image imparts form and direction to the forces being concentrated upon the desired object or subject. It may be likened to the image upon the slide of a magic lantern, through which the focused rays of the illuminant pass, resulting in the reproduction of a corresponding image upon the screen or drapery beyond. The analogy is indeed exceedingly precise if one recalls that the minds of the majority are, to a greater or lesser degree, blank screens or curtains upon which play the images produced by external influences, suggestions, environments, etc. For very few individuals realize their own individuality, existing merely as reflections of the thoughts and concepts of others. An eminent authority, Sir Francis Galton, who was among the leading figures in the psychology of preceding generations, has remarked upon this subject as follows. The free action of a high visualizing faculty is of significant importance in connection with the higher processes of generalized thought. A visual image constitutes the most perfect form of mental representation wherever the shape, position, and spatial relations of objects are concerned. The most superior artisans are those who visualize the entirety of their proposed undertaking before taking a tool in hand. Strategists, artists of all denominations, physicists who devise new experiments, in short, all who do not merely follow routine, possess a necessity for it. A faculty that is of import in all technical and artistic occupations, that lends accuracy to our perceptions and justice to our generalizations, is starved by indolent disuse rather than being cultivated judiciously in a manner that will, on the whole, yield the optimal return. I maintain that a serious study regarding the optimal method of developing and utilizing this faculty, without prejudice to the practice of abstract thought in symbols, represents one of the many pressing requirements in the as yet unformed science of education. Furthermore, just as Galton has articulated the value of utilizing this mental faculty in the affairs of the material plane, so too is it valid regarding manifestations upon the mental plane. One recognizes that the more distinct a mental picture one possesses of any desired object, the more precisely one comprehends the nature of that desire, and the more thoroughly one comprehends the latter, the more capable one is of initiating steps to acquire it. Many individuals traverse life desiring something, yet without truly ascertaining precisely what it is they desire. Is it, therefore, any source of wonder that they fail to realize or materialize their desires more effectively? This identical principle remains valid upon the plane of the manifestation of mental influence. If one wishes to materialize any phenomenon through the use of this influence, is he not disadvantaged by the absence of a mental image of precisely what he wishes to materialize? Conversely, is he not significantly aided by the creation of a mental pattern or plan, in the form of a mental picture, through and around which he may direct his thought currents? The occultists manifesting the highest degree of mental influence acquire, through practice, this art of creating mental images of that which they intend to materialize. They discipline their imagination in this manner until the very act of creating the mental image contributes powerfully toward the actual materialization or event, viewing it as actually existing within their minds before they attempt to concentrate their thought waves upon the task of its accomplishment. Then, the mental picture being completed and standing in distinct outline, they focus their mental force through it, precisely as in the case of the aforementioned magic lantern, and the image is reproduced upon the screen of the mentality of others. The imagination may be fortified in numerous ways, the fundamental principle being constant and persistent practice. The practice of recalling to memory scenes previously witnessed, and subsequently either describing them to others or drafting a rudimentary sketch of them, will assist in this endeavor. Describe to others scenes one has witnessed, occurrences and details of appearances, etc., until one is able to mentally reproduce the aspects and visages of these objects. Subsequently, one may commence the drafting of mental pictures of desired objects as though they were being delineated upon the screen of the mind. Visualize mentally the events as actually occurring. Create a private theater within the mind, and there enact the dramas that one wishes to witness in actual life. Upon acquiring this skill, one will be capable of projecting one's mental pictures upon the screen of objectivity in actual life with far greater efficacy. In contemplating this subject, one would be well advised to retain the illustration of the magic lantern, for the metaphor is an apt one and will enable one to better sustain the concept within the mind. Observe that, in offering this suggestion, we are effective. Do you want access to this and all the complete audiobooks on the channel, plus the ebook version? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code in the left corner of the screen to access our library, where you can listen to your favorite esoteric books without ad interruptions, lock your screen, or use other apps while the narration plays, and even download the ebook version to follow along as you listen. Listen on your computer via web browser, or download the app from the Play Store. After subscribing, you will receive an email with your login details, password, and step-by-step instructions on how to access the books through the Hotmart app.